Hello, I hope everyone is well. Um, Today I'm going to be analyzing the newest chapter of Chainsaw Man, chapter 182, titled Cute. Also, I am so glad I remembered, but huge spoiler warnings for the entirety of Chainsaw Man and other works of art from Fujimoto, such as Fire Punch, Goodbye Eri, and Look Back. This chapter of Chainsaw Man is one out of the 100 prime examples of why I consider Fujimoto my favorite author of all time. I think this chapter in particular illustrates the intentionality of Fujimoto's storytelling and the themes and lessons Fujimoto is trying to depict to his audience. We start off this chapter with Yoru forcibly engaging in a sexualized behavior towards Denji. This is a common theme in Denji's life, as sexualized acts have often been used as a bargaining chip in order to manipulate and control Denji in certain ways. For example, in Chapter 5 of Chainsaw Man, Power coerced Denji to rescue her cat Meowie by stating that she will allow him to fondle her chest as a reward if Denji is successful in rescuing Meowie. In addition, in Chapter 14, Himeno encouraged Denji to take down the devil, which we will later find out to be the Eternity Devil, by telling him that she'll give him a kiss with tongue. Moreover, in Chapter 44, Rize initiates a kiss with Denji in order to get him to lower his guard so she can attack him and take Pochita. And these are just events that happen in the very beginning of the story of Chainsaw Man. In more recent chapters, like chapter 137, without Denji's consent, Fumiko starts touching his groin and asks him if he wants to have sex with her in order to control him and get him to follow her commands without doubt, as we later find out that Fumiko is working with public safety in order to tame Denji so he does not transform into Chainsaw Man. Furthermore, into infamous chapter 167, Yoru forcibly performs non mutual masturbation on Denji in order to distract him from the traumatic events that recently happened to him so he can turn into Chainsaw Man and they could fight. Um, for all of these examples, I don't think it's surprising that Denji tries to follow through with them or that Denji doesn't set his boundaries and say no. Because in the very first introductory chapter of Chainsaw Man, we see a flashback of Denji as a young boy being commanded by a Yakuza member to whore himself out in order to pay his late father's debt. And at that young age, we have to keep in mind that Denji lost both of his caregivers. And as a child, Denji must have been thinking about what he was going to do in order to survive. And if an authority figure is telling Denji to let people use his body in a sexual way at that very young age, uh, Denji most likely thinks it's acceptable that people use his body in a predatorial and unsafe sexualized way. And I think that trauma history that Denji has experienced is important to consider because Denji is at his breaking point. Yet, despite being at the very edge of his window of tolerance, Denji is exhibiting immense character development. After Yoru forcibly and non consensually kisses Denji again for a second time, Denji pushes her away, effectively resisting a sexualized act that was imposed upon him. And when I read this, I was so ecstatic. I stood up and I started clapping for our boy Denji. I felt like such a proud father at this moment because Denji has been questioning why people have been sexually manipulating him since the Reizei arc. He even emphasizes that all these manipulative tactics ultimately lead to people trying to kill him. And to see him not only question, but affirmatively set a boundary with a trauma pattern that keeps showing up in his life, I think that is extremely empowering. We're only 4 pages into this chapter, and yet there's so much to unpack. And I think that encapsulates the brilliance of Fujimoto's writing. So, after Denji tells Yoru that he becomes hyper focused on sexualized acts whenever something sexual happens, which to keep in mind, being hyper focused is a common response for people with trauma, as evidenced by people becoming hyper vigilant of their surroundings after living through an adverse experience. Um, Yoru tries to relate to Denji's statement of being hopeless. And unsurprisingly, Yoru fails at trying to cheer up Denji. Yoru tries to be like Deku, but rather than saving someone, Yoru tries to cheer Denji up with a smile on her face. And it is predictably ineffective. However, why can we expect Yoru to fail at cheering Denji up? We have to remember that Yoru is the personification of war. She is literally the war devil. And war is not a cheerful thing. War brings despair and agony and horror. Cheerfulness is just not Yoru's forte. However, I do think her dialogue here is very interesting. Yoru tries to relate to Denji by telling him that she lost people who were like family to her, referencing the gun devil and the tank devil. But notice how she specifically uses the term people rather than devil. I think this illustrates Fujimoto's attempt to humanize devils. In addition, Yoru also states that the gun devil and the tank devil were like a family to her. And I think you can theorize from this statement that in the Chainsaw Man universe, devils can have systems in which the individual devils that make up the system can have a harmonious and loving relationship with each other. And the exploration of the relationships within families and its effects it has on people is a common theme within Fujimoto's stories. In Fire Punch, we see how Agni's relationship with his sister is a motivating force for him. In Goodbye Eri, we explore how Yuta deals with grieving the death of his mother. And in Chainsaw Man Part 1, we explore how the effects of having a chosen family influences people who don't have any biological family members, as indicated by the shared growth between Aki, Power, and Denji. So, in the conversation that follows, Asa tells Denji about the time her mother died. In this conversation, we see that Asa blames herself for the death of her mother because her mother died trying to save Asa. And I think this conversation is very important because it's bringing both Denji and Asa closer to each other. And just to say out loud, as a Denji and Asa shipper, I absolutely love that. However, I think this conversation is an important one to have because it accomplishes 2 things. One, it accomplishes relationality. And two, I think this conversation will serve as the spark to reignite Denji's will to strive forward. Relationality is an important thing to have because as humans, it is crucial to our well being to have some sort of connection with someone. In fact, many anthropologists and sociologists agree that society was only able to become a thing when humans started helping each other out. Um, and when you think about it, Denji at this point has lost everybody that he has ever cared for. Denji has lost Aki, Power, Nayuta, and all the pets that he was taking care of. So right now, Denji must feel some immense loneliness. And by trying to be there for him, Asa is helping Denji stay alive. In addition, Asa is also unknowingly bringing her and Denji closer together because Denji can relate to feeling responsible for a loved one's death. In here, Fujimoto is drawing parallels between Asa's story and Denji's life. In Chainsaw Man Part 1, we see Denji blaming himself for Aki's death. He reflects by saying he killed Aki. And I think he means he killed Aki in two ways. One, because he literally had to kill him due to Aki becoming the gun fiend. And also, two, I think Denji is thinking he killed Aki because Denji is Chainsaw Man. And what I mean by this is that Denji is probably thinking if he never made a contract with Pochita, which effectively transformed him into Chainsaw Man, Aki would most likely be alive. And this is because of how popular Chainsaw Man is within the Chainsaw Man universe. In Chainsaw Man Part 1, we see a news report covering the battle between Rize and Chainsaw Man. And Makima clearly knows the impact this story will have because she expresses that assassins from all over the world will begin to hunt down Denji. So Denji must know how popular he is as Chainsaw Man. And because Aki is so closely associated with Denji and Chainsaw Man, Denji is most likely thinking that he is putting Aki in harm's way. And because we know that the Gun Devil was after Pochita, or Denji's heart, and because we know that Aki ultimately became the gun fiend, Denji is probably thinking that all the events that led up to Chainsaw Man's popularity is also a direct causation for Aki's death. Moreover, we can assume that Denji also blames himself for Power's death. When Denji told Makima that he wants her to think for him because contemplating about making decisions overwhelms Denji, Makima tests her control over Denji by having Power come over to her complex. And when Denji questions this, Makima tells Denji not to think. In addition, Makima commands Denji to open the door for Power so she can kill her. And before Denji opens the door, we see him trying to rationalize why Power is at Makima's complex, as if he's trying to overshadow the fact that Makima clearly expressed that she intends to kill Power. And because Denji doesn't resist opening the door, which led to Makima killing Power, Denji is in the same situation again, in which he is probably thinking his existence is the direct causation for another person's death. So when Asa tells Denji that she feels responsible for her mother's death, Denji knows exactly how she feels. And this is not the first time Fujimoto has explored the themes of feeling responsible for one's death. In his one-shot Look Back, Fujino blames herself for Kiyomoto's death. I think this relational conversation that Asa and Denji is having is one of the most important conversations we have had so far in the entire story of Chainsaw Man. I think if this dialogue didn't happen, Denji would have been taken out of his window of tolerance, and he would have not been able to get out of this deep emotional pit that he is in. However, since he is able to connect with someone, especially someone that he has spent a significant amount of time with, Denji is allowing himself to feel validated about the cause and effects of the event he has gone through. And in addition, by connecting with someone, Denji can feel less alone. I also just want to say out loud how I really love how Fujimoto incorporates death in his storytelling. One pet peeve I have with storytelling is when authors have a significant character die and the surviving cast members only grieve through the rest of the arc or like a funeral scene. And once these scenes are done, their surviving casts go on with the rest of their lives as if the character that died was never there. And for me, this type of progression in storytelling feels very inhuman. So I really appreciate that Aki and Power both have a pivotal and impactful role on the story 100 chapters after their death. And I think that represents how much foresight and intention and care Fujimoto puts in his storytelling. Now, the second reason why I think the conversation between Denji and Asa is crucial to the story is because I predict it will be used as the seed that grows Denji's will to keep moving forward. So far, this is the lowest point we have seen Denji in, and even though he was able to connect with Asa, Denji still needs some motivation to keep moving forward. This is evidenced by Denji asking Asa how she got over her mom's death, because it shows that Denji is looking for a way to move forward from Aki and Power's death. And I absolutely love Asa's response to Denji. She expresses to him that getting over someone's death is impossible. It's just something you can't do. And I think that's important to note because I see a lot of discourse online predicting that Denji will face his trauma, and in doing so, he will overcome the feeling of Aki and Power's death. And I think that partially misses the mark. I do agree that in the upcoming chapters, Denji is possibly going to face his traumas, but I disagree that Denji is going to get over Aki and Power's death in particular. I think what Fujimoto is trying to tell the reader is exactly what Asa expressed. There's no way to get over death. There's no way Denji is going to get over Aki and Power. Um, However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the only thing life has to offer now is sadness. In clinical mental health counseling, there's a theory called postmodernism that serves as an umbrella term for different types of therapy, such as social constructionism and narrative therapy. And I like to discuss them here in order to relate them to this chapter. In all these types of therapies, they share two similarities. One is the belief that society creates dominant narratives that we often find ourselves in conflict with. For example, one dominant narrative in society is men being breadwinners, and women being responsible for domestic household activities when the two are in a heterosexual relationship. This can create conflict within the relationship if either partner does not want to subscribe to the narrative that society has deemed as dominant. The other similarity is the use of reauthoring as an intervention for clients. This is what I particularly want to focus on. So, when a therapist engages a client in reauthorizing, the therapist is asking questions about the client's life in order to build on the competence already present in the client. This means that when a client is facing a problem, the therapist is asking questions about past times that the client refused to cooperate with the problem. For example, a therapist could ask, was there ever a time where you were tempted to drink but were able to refrain from drinking? And the therapist is doing this because when we have a problem, it's easy to overlook and dismiss the times in which we resisted the problem. And so, by identifying times in which we resisted problems, we can use those historical events as our preferred reality in order to enact hope and show the power we always had within ourselves. So, the therapist is helping the client reauthor their lives because they don't have to go with the narrative that they fall for the tricks of their problems. They can go with the narrative that they have always had the competency to refuse their problems. And this reauthoring intervention occurs naturally within the conversation Asa and Denji is having with each other. When Asa tells Denji that she has learned something from him, Asa reflects to the time when Denji told her that despite all the hardship he has gone through, he can still keep looking forward. And this callback is evidenced by Asa bringing the term crab burger back, which was the exact same term Denji used in order to motivate Asa. And this conversation occurred in chapter 127, which was 55 chapters ago. So, just like a therapist, Asa is using Denji's past history to show that he has always had the capacity and competency to resist his problems. In addition, Asa is encouraging Denji by indirectly telling him that he could be a positive role model. And this is indicated by Asa telling Denji that she taught him how to keep looking forward, despite all the hardships that she will go through. So after this conversation, I think Denji was so vulnerable that the conversation itself evoked negative cues within Denji, which ultimately led him to throw up. And having a physical response from an evoked cue is a common thing for people with trauma, as evidenced by military veterans with PTSD getting startled by fireworks because the sound emitted is similar to the sound of war. And even though I think this conversation will have long-lasting positive effects, in the immediate, this conversation was triggering for Denji because he's the type to avoid his thoughts and suppress them. and this is evidenced by him telling Makima that he doesn't want to think. In addition, we also see him avoid his thoughts during the Falling Devil arc when he intentionally hurts himself in order to not think about Aki and power. So, after Denji throws up, snow automatically appears in the world. And we can most likely confirm that what Denji threw up is the Snow Devil. Because in chapter 174, it was revealed that Pochita slash Black Chainsaw Man ate the Snow Devil. One thing I want to say is that whoever theorized the idea that Pochita is eating Denji's trauma, that motherfucker is cooking. I personally wasn't fully on board with that theory, but after this chapter, I can see it being a plausibility. However, I think it's more in the lines of Pochita eating aspects of Denji's trauma rather than the sole reason for the trauma itself. This is because the flashback that popped up in Denji's mind at the end of this chapter is calm and ordinary. In chapter 126, when the Falling Devil forcibly imposes a flashback on Denji, causing him to remember Aki and power, the flashbacks were from events that happened right before each respective character died in front of Denji. So when we compare the two flashbacks and how they popped up in Denji's mind, we see that one memory is calm and ordinary, while the other is harsh and cruel. And I think the harsh and cruel one is more closer to the sole reason of Denji's trauma. And since Denji did not throw up the harsh and cruel one, I think Pochita is eating things that could possibly remind Denji of his trauma rather than the exact trauma itself. And I do want to specify that I think the panel with Aki and Power at the end of this chapter is a flashback. And I think if it was not, and Aki and Power somehow come back in some sort of physical or illusionary form that interacts with present day Denji, that development that Denji will get from that interaction would be a complete disservice to Asa's character. I say this because both Asa and Denji can relate to each other by feeling responsible for a loved one's death. And I think if in future chapters we see Denji reconcile that feeling through interacting with some form of Aki and power, that interaction would only further separate Denji and Asa. This is because Denji would have been given the opportunity to interact with Aki and power after their death, while Asa only has to live in the reality that she would most likely never get that opportunity to interact with her mom after her death. So that's my analysis on this chapter. The key takeaways I want to emphasize is Denji's character development regarding sexual manipulation and Asa's relational and reauthorizing conversation with Denji. I think these takeaways will act as a spark that reignites Denji's will to keep moving forward, and I also think he's going to accept Asa's statement about not being able to get over a loved one's death. And I think because Asa is modeling resiliency to Denji, as evidenced by Asa looking and moving forward in life, despite not being able to get over her mother's death, Denji will attempt to do the same. In here, I'm getting similar vibes to Cowboy Bebop, in which Shinichiro Watanabe's lesson to the audience is that you're gonna carry that weight. Meaning that after watching Spike begin his journey and seeing how his story unfolds and seeing how his story ends, we as a viewer are gonna carry that weight of his emotional baggage. In addition, I think at the same time, Watanabe is saying that we can't let go of the things that happen in our lives. For example, if someone abused you, that is a historical experience in your life that will never go away due to it simply being a lived experience. That weight is something that you're going to carry for the rest of your life. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that life cannot get any better after that. Watanabe explored the great things that Spike has done after his traumatic event, and he also showed the lived experiences that were filled with happiness and adventure. And I think we could relate that back to Denji. I think Denji is going to learn that for the rest of his life, he is going to carry the weight of Aki and Power's death. However, I think when Denji reflects and sees the competency and capacity he has always had to keep moving forward, his threshold of resiliency will strengthen. And I think because the weight he's going to carry is so heavy, Denji will become stronger than what he can even imagine. It's like going to the gym. The heavier the weight you can carry, the stronger you can become. And I think that's what Fujimoto has in store for Denji, and also what he's trying to say to the audience, especially considering the fact that resiliency is a common theme in Fujimoto's stories. For example, in Fire Punch, when Agni was on the brink of death, he was able to gather up strength to keep moving forward because he wanted to keep his sister's wish alive. In Goodbye Eri, my personal favorite one-shot from Fujimoto, Yuta resisted completing suicide because he found someone who finally validated his feelings and inspired him to create a movie. And in Look Back, Fujino was able to reignite her passion for creating manga when she found a 4-panel illustrative story inspired by her style of illustrating, drawn by her best friend Kiyomoto. So I could definitely be wrong in my predictions because this story is literally still going. I mean, we're gonna have a new chapter tomorrow, but I still think it's cool and impressive to see Fujimoto not only illustrate but storyboard a series that can engage its readers with such deep theory crafting. I genuinely feel privileged and honored to be reading this story on a weekly slash bi-weekly basis. And I personally don't have anyone in my life that reads Chainsaw Man on a weekly basis. So all these thoughts I've had about it, I've just been keeping to myself for like the past 3 years. Um, so if anyone sees this and is caught up with Chainsaw Man, I would love to hear your thoughts about what's going on, or what you think about the story, or what you think about my analysis, or if there is things that you disagree on with my analysis. Um, because I maybe interpreting things differently, and I would love to shift my perspective on this and view it from a lens that I may not be considering. So it'd be cool to hear from you and what you have to say. Um, and yeah, that's my video. Thank you.